now.
Thank you. Just to build on what Susan and Zubaida were saying, Philip Alston, the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty, and more recently Michael Marmot have drawn attention to the extraordinary and growing and widening inequalities and poverty that are going on, and the fact that we're approaching 40% of our children living below the poverty line. So children in particular have been badly affected as well in this lockdown by being denied the right to education. And school is much more just than about education. So in a way, COVID has shone a spotlight on these growing and widening inequalities. And much of the discourse is neglected, as you and Susan rightly say, the most vulnerable in society. We're all vulnerable, but they're really, truly vulnerable in society. And I think we should be picking this up and, referencing Michael Marmot and Philip Alston, because unless we tackle this with a systematic plan, we're not going to get very far, and we'll just see what could happen as after 2008 is a continuing widening of the inequalities and poverty because of austerity. And that leads me really into 2 points that I want to make with reference to the previous conversation. One is we know that COVID and the lockdown has had great collateral damage, particularly on older people, vulnerable groups, children with learning difficulties and people with disabilities. And we see the tip of the iceberg in the excess deaths. I do think it's a great pity that the government uses the daily death toll, the death counts and the testing counts as a propaganda tool, because these data are unreliable when they're reported daily, they're inaccurate, and they're under-reporting all the other excess deaths. And really, they should have the official statisticians, the Office of National Statistics do a great job, very rigorous, and they should be reporting once a week or once a fortnight. We don't need this daily death toll. It's being used as a propaganda tool, and the testing data are inaccurate and incoherent. So I just want to make this point for the public that it's really important that we understand where the official statistics are, where they're gathered, and how they can be misused by government. But the second point, I think, relates to the whole issue, again, around the excess deaths, is what's the collateral damage of COVID? And in the NHS, we know we were told we were to protect the NHS. Well, all of my life, I've been told the NHS was there to protect me. So this is an extraordinary position to put me into, that I've got to protect the NHS and I've got to stay at home to save lives. And of course, the reason why we're in this position is because for 30 years, we've had a decimation of public services, and especially the NHS, with marketisation, privatisation, foundation trusts that can now generate up to half their income from private patients, and a whole diversion of money through the private finance initiative and the contracting and commissioning. And yet the government has been able to stop contracting and commissioning just like that when it wanted to, because it could see it was inefficient. So really the government needs to revisit its public sector policies, and we focused a lot on hospitals and ITUs, which is right, but we need to focus on all the other parts, the bits that have stopped, the community mental health services, the community health services, and above all, the 400,000 people who are in nursing homes who've been completely left outside of the system. And this is an opportunity for a really radical relook at why public services matter. The government should be putting its hand up and saying why it's got it wrong, where it's got it wrong, and why we need to rebuild it and not continue the policy of privatising and contracting out. And that will also mean that we've got to look at an employment strategy and an industrial strategy, and thinking about how we're going to redeploy staff who are furloughed and unemployed and really build up the sectors that need it. Many of the deaths in the nursing homes were preventable and avoidable, and people dying alone without relatives is inhumane and barbaric. But not only that, we could have put in many more staffing if the government had decided to requisition those homes early. It could have doubled the nursing staff and tripled them, and it could have redeployed staff from quiet bits of the NHS. So I think what I'm saying is that really the other part of the system that we will be coming to is the whole carving out and loss of the local community, which is what Susan's been talking about. Local government is really reduced to a bin service and a contracting out service. Local government needs to be empowered and enhanced so it can take on the public health roles, the educational roles, the things that have been decimated and destroyed with billions of pounds worth of cuts over the last 10, 20 years. And we really need to rebuild that. If we are serious about the community and community involvement, we need to rebuild that capacity. That includes the public health capacity for contact tracing. And I'm really worried that the government's solution now is centralising and privatising, with the news that Serco is going to run the contact tracing centres, with the news that we've got Deloitte's running testing services. This is extremely worrying. The government needs to wake up and realise the value and the importance of public services and public ownership and public control. And I'm sorry I'm going on about this, but we are in this position. The lockdown has been necessitated because we actually decimated our public services. So we limited our options and choices, which is why we are where we are now.
Thank you, Allyson.